Greetings everyone, I'm Stefan, and today we'll be finally answering the question of what tradition trees should you go for first. But before we can cover that, we first have to understand how the system works in general, as well as what the different tradition trees actually do for you. So let's get started with the basics, and the basic is Unity. Now, Unity is very similar to research output in the sense that you use Unity to give permanent bonuses to your empire. However, unlike technology, traditions are more customizable and are a little bit weaker than tech. I would say that if you have an option of rushing tech or rushing Unity, you really should be rushing tech, because tech will give you a lot more and a lot more powerful bonuses to your empire than Unity. However, even if you're not rushing Unity, you will still be getting a bit of it. For example, with a standard empire, you're going to have administrators producing 8 Unity at the start. You're going to have your enforcer producing a bit of Unity as well. And overall, if you just keep playing and keep building up more planets, you will get more Unity output over time. There's a very similar thing with hive minds and with megacorps, although if you're playing as Machine Empire, maybe you should focus a bit on Unity. But as a normal empire, you can generally ignore dedicated Unity production. You can just get it off your population as is. And you can spend those Unity points from your population into some great early game bonuses, depending on which path you want to go for. So as you adopt a tree, for example, Prosperity, you're going to get the first adoption bonus, plus 20% to mining station output. Then you go through, you take all the different traditions within the tree. You will see the arrows mean that you really got to take one thing before you can take the other. And after that, you get the finisher bonus and an ascension perk. Generally, I would recommend finishing a tree before moving on to the next one, but if you're going for something like diplomacy and all you want is to form a federation, you can just go for the federation tradition and just, continue on with a new tree. There is a penalty to doing this though, and that's that, first of all, you don't get the extra ascension perk and the finisher effect, and secondly, that's the more tradition trees you adopt, the higher the cost is. So if we, for example, adopt adaptability, discovery, diplomacy, etc., it's going to increase the cost of new traditions by 5%. 5% isn't all that much, but it really adds up, so keep that in mind. Of course, there's going to be a lot of caveats as I go into the traditions themselves, because they are all specific to an aspect of your empire, but even then, some of them are simply better than others. A good example is expansion. Being able to grow your empire faster and grow your population faster is very important. The population aspect especially is what makes this tree very, very good. If you, for example, colonize 10 planets, and you already have taken the expansion tradition called colonization fervor, you're going to get 10 extra pops. And then if you take a new life, those pops will breed a lot faster, contributing to more raw population, which means more resources and a bigger and more powerful empire. However, those are the primary benefits of expansion. You're not going to get a whole lot more than that. And if you're not planning on just chilling in an area of space with a lot of planets for the first 100 years, you might be better off going for something else, such as, for example, discovery. You will be getting some pretty nice bonuses out of discovery. In particular, plus 10% to research speed and plus 1 to research alternatives. Now, many people underestimate the power of research alternatives, but being able to select from more technologies in your tech tree is very essential, especially if you know the ins and outs of techs, because the more choice you have, the more control you have over having your empire get good. Besides these research bonuses that will apply at any point in the game, Discovery also has some bonuses that are really good early on. Anomaly research speed and increased survey speed, which is very helpful, but not necessarily enough to make Discovery your first pick if you're not going for a tech rush. If you're just going for an economy rush, you might instead go for something like Prosperity. And I know it's crazy, Prosperity used to be a pretty meh tree back in the day, but these days in 3.1, Prosperity is amazing. Just take a look at the finisher effect for this thing. Resources from jobs plus 5% and plus 5 stability. If you add all the bonuses you get together, you will essentially get 13% specialist output and 8% worker output. There's a reason why Meritocracy, a civic that gives plus 10% to specialist output, is one of the best civics in the game. specialist output is what makes your empire tick. Alloys allow you to conquer empires, and research allows you to be very, very dominant. And also, I guess if you're running culture workers like I didn't advise you to, the specialist output will apply there as well, so you're going to get faster unity production. No matter what point you are in the game, taking prosperity is always a good pick. Even if you have taken expansion or discovery as the first pick, I would recommend taking prosperity as the second one. If you don't take it as a second one, it's a third pick, and a fourth pick if, you know, etc, etc. The only situation where I personally wouldn't take prosperity is if I'm literally just gunning for a war in year 10 and I have to take supremacy to be able to build up some fleet bonuses. And when it comes to fleet bonuses, supremacy is definitely on top. One thing to know about supremacy though is as of 3.1 it no longer gives you extra star bases. It gives you plus 20 naval capacity instead, which arguably is better in the early game, but perhaps worse in the late game. And also kind of worse if you're planning to use those star bases for farming stuff. But that's another matter entirely. When it comes to fleet power, supremacy will firstly give you bonuses to your actual ships, such as, for example, 10% extra fire rate and 20% extra damage to star bases. And you will also be able to produce more ships because they're cheaper, they can be built faster, and you can contain more of them with extra naval capacity. All in all, you're probably looking at a 20% to 25% better fleet by just going with supremacy than with going with anything else. And 20 to 25% is very conservative, especially considering how with supremacy, you unlock war policies as the finisher effect. These war policies, or as it says in game, war doctrines, allow you to select from a variety of bonuses. There is, of course, no retreat if you're playing as a militarist, which gives you plus 33% ship fire rate, making your fleet not 20% stronger, but 50% stronger, at the cost of reducing disengagement. I have done a video on disengagement specifically. You can find that in the top right corner, but disengagement can be quite good early on. And so hit and run, the policy that allows you to disengage more, can be quite valuable. Other than that, there's defensive depth and rapid deployment. Rapid deployment is extremely useful in the late game because the more range your ships have, the more of a chance they have to be the first ones to fire. And if your ships are the first ones firing, and they have massively destructive neutron launchers on them, you're going to be in a good spot. Defensive depth, on the other hand, is kind of lame. I'm going to be honest, I don't think I've ever taken this perk myself, but I guess if you're relying purely on star bases for defense, defensive depth could be quite good because it does apply to star bases. And speaking of star bases, there's actually a brand new tree introduced in Stellaris 3.1 that allows you to really boost your star bases. Like, you're going to get plus 4 to starbase cap, you're going to get plus 50% to upgrade speed, and minus 50% to upgrade cost, which means that you're going to be able to build a lot more star bases very quickly and very cheaply. Unyielding can be great if you're, for example, a hive mind or machine empire and you're just using those star bases for solar farms or food farms, but otherwise, if you're in a defensive situation, this is also amazing. Generally, I wouldn't recommend Unyielding as one of the first picks unless you're really bent on just being a turtle for the first 30 or so years. Instead, you should probably take this pick as like your third or fourth one, where you're able to upgrade all your star bases and make them into very powerful and very cheap fortresses. The only empire type where I would recommend going for this tradition tree early on is robots, because there's actually a tradition in this tree which allows your strongholds to produce 3 unity without being actually manned. It's kind of like the old memorialists. The building itself produces unity for the cost of 1 upkeep and 1 building slot. With robots, it's pretty easy to have a lot of building slots, so spamming strongholds can be pretty viable to help you boost your unity output. And in fact, it's not just a robot thing. You can also do this with any normal empire, but normally building slots are a bit more valuable, and so on and so forth. Unyielding does also have a bonus to defensive platforms, but defensive platforms suck, so unless you're really desperate and you really need a star base to be stronger than what it is, defensive platforms suck. Don't go for them. And speaking of bad ideas, let's take a quick look at Subterfuge. Yeah, subterfuge is essentially just, what is it? Oh, a waste? Garbage? Trash? I don't know what to call it, but it's one of those things. Espionage is a really, really weak and underpowered mechanic in the game, and if you even boost it by 200 or 300%, it's still going to be hot garbage. So yeah, don't go for this. Go for something like mercantile instead if you really do want a meme. You see, mercantile is another new tree added in Stellaris 3.1, and this one will give you a lot of bonuses to trade value. Now, in previous versions, I would have said that trade value is a complete joke, and even in 3.1 it is mostly a joke, but there is one thing that can make it very viable, and that is merchants. With mercantile, your biggest effect from this tree is going to be this tradition right here, commercial enterprise. +1 merchant job per commercial zone, commercial segment, or trade district. Unlike clerks, who are still a complete joke, merchants are OP. They produce a base of 12 trade value each, which with various modifiers can easily get up to 24. And with 24 trade value merchants, and let's say a trade league policy, which allows you to produce unity, consumer goods, and energy, you'd be making a grand total of 12 energy, 6 unity, and 6 consumer goods per merchant. That's kind of broken, and considering how you can get that up and running in the first 5 years of the game, merchants are kind of meta. Trade value is not modified by ordinary output bonuses, and so if you go for trade, you go mercantile, and you probably go for all the other trees because the amount of unity you're going to be able to make is insane. Speaking of insane, actually, I can't really speak of insane. That's all the good trees covered. Let's take a look at some of the other ones, which can be useful situationally, but are generally not as good. Starting with diplomacy, which I hinted at earlier. Diplomacy gives you 2 primary benefits. First, you'll be able to do all diplomatic actions at a 50% reduced cost. This means that forming commercial pacts or defensive pacts or federations costs 50% less influence per month. And you're also able to form federations by picking the federation tradition. This is very nice. It also gives you an extra envoy, and yeah, that's honestly where the whole diplomacy thing ends. Besides those 2 things, diplomacy is quite bad. There is a potential for this tradition right here. It will give you +3 unity per embassy, so in theory, you could farm a lot of unity by making a bunch of embassies. Similarly, adaptability is another tree that is good to dip into and not very good after that. Adaptability can give you +1 building slot to all your planets, which can be quite useful, but otherwise doesn't really give you all that much. It gives you resettlement cost reduction, army bombardment damage reduction, defensive army damage increase. Overall, this thing is quite poor. And even though by finishing adaptability you will get the bonus of planetary prospecting kinda sucks. Now, this isn't too bad on planets which are normally really poor in resources. For example, if you have a planet with no energy, mining, or food districts at all, this can be quite nice. But generally speaking, you could just put those planets towards industry or something else. And the cost of planetary prospecting really isn't worth what you get out of it. The adaptability tree is something I don't generally go for, similarly to domination and harmony. Both of these trees give you various bonuses that can be useful in certain circumstances, but are generally quite weak. The only notable thing about these 2 trees is that they both share +1 edict capacity on one of their traditions. And this +1 edict capacity is relatively good. It's quite good, I'd say. But does it justify taking these trees? Not really. Harmony and Domination are both trees that I would generally go for in the late game. But if I were to choose one that is slightly better than the other, I'd probably go for Domination. This one gives you +20% admin cap, +0.5 influence, and some extra bonuses to your workers and slaves. However, even then, I'd go for this only as a late game option after going for good stuff like Supremacy, Discovery, Prosperity, and stuff like that. And speaking of those trees, let's take a look at what you normally would go for as far as order goes if you were to play, for example, this empire right here. This right here is my Fungus and Mogus Clone Army Rush build, and here I would go for Prosperity as the first tree for those sweet economy bonuses, and then transition into a military focus with supremacy. By the time I'm done with supremacy, I would probably go for my first war and conquer some territory, at which point I would either go for domination to get bonuses to, influence, edict capacity, and worker bonuses, or discovery for the research bonuses. Typically, I'd go for discovery and also get that extra research alternative. If at any point I want to go and make a federation, I would go for diplomacy and just pick the federation perk. Otherwise, I go for domination, harmony, or unyielding to build up star bases. Another example would be playing as a more peaceful empire. With this sort of build, I would go for expansion first and foremost to ensure that I get as many planets early as possible and get a lot of pop growth on them. Expansion does pay off very handsomely in the first 100 years, and considering how, as a peaceful empire, you probably aren't going to attack anyone in the first 100 years, expansion is very, very nice. After expansion, I would either go for discovery or prosperity. Discovery would allow me to survey stuff faster and get more of a tech base up and running quicker. Prosperity, on the other hand, as I mentioned before, is just quite good, and we'd probably go for that as the second perk and discovery as our third perk. If at any point, though, we are threatened by another empire that is bigger than us, I would drop whatever I'm doing and instead go for unyielding. With unyielding, you're able to fortify your empire very, very quickly and very, very powerfully. And going for all these juicy starbase bonuses could really pay off. If, however, the surrounding situation is peaceful and the neighbors are friendly, I would go for adaptability, domination, or harmony. Not in any particular order, but mostly dependent on what circumstances arise within the empire. If I'm lacking influence, I would go domination. If I want more leader lifespan, I'd go harmony. And if I have a lot of low habitability planets, I'd go for adaptability. And if for whatever reason you want to transition out of peacefulness and into war, going supremacy is always going to be a good idea. All of this is relatively straightforward. But what about a more wacky build, such as for example this right here, the Merchantman? With this build, I would definitely go first and foremost for mercantile. Now you will notice that I haven't gone for mercantile with the other two builds because mercantile doesn't give you much of a benefit for an empire that is not focused on trade. The only thing useful to those other empires for mercantile would be insider trading, which gives you minus 10% market fee. But with a merchant focused build, we of course want commercial enterprise as early as possible. And in fact, that's exactly what we're going to gun for first and foremost. We're going to take adaptive economic policies to actually be able to change our trade policy from wealth creation, and then we would just spam merchants. As we spam merchants, we'd probably do one of two things. Either we would go to war and try to get more planets and therefore more merchants, or we would want to just expand our habitats and live relatively peacefully. In the first option, I would go supremacy. In the second option, I would go prosperity. After these first two trees, which generally will be completed very, very quickly, if you use the marketplace of ideas and a lot of merchants, I would go for diplomacy and try to gun for a federation as quickly as possible. With a merchant-focused build, you do want to be in a trade league, and being able to form one is very, very useful in actually being in a trade league. After that, I would go for discovery for those nice bonuses, and then most likely supremacy for, the military aspect of things. If I don't go for supremacy as the second tree, I would definitely go for it as one of the later ones, because those fleet bonuses do be kind of nice though. For the last two tradition trees, I would go for harmony, domination, and adaptability, depending on what you need at the time. Now, with habitats, it is viable to go for expansion early on. With this build, you want to go for merchants early on, not necessarily expansion, but just FYI, with expansion as a Void Dweller start, you will get a minus 20% to habitat build cost, which is quite significant. And if you want to go for just pure habitat spam, going expansion as the first thing and then going with other stuff later is also a very good option. But anyways, that's gonna do it for today. Special thank you to my Patreon supporters, and I hope you guys learned something in this video. If you did, please do consider dropping a like. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.